so now we're on to Module 6, which is the law of supply, supply curves, and so forth. So what makes a producer? So now you've got to switch your mind thought to you are the business owner. You are the person supplying the labor or supplying the good or the service or whatever it is. And think about how many, think about it from providing your labor at work. You know, if I was willing to hire you to come and work at, you know, a rental house that I have or whatever, you know, if I offered you $1 an hour, how many hours would you be willing to work this week? Well, none. But at $8 an hour, maybe you'd work 10. At $20 an hour, you'd work all you could. You'd quit school for that, maybe, who knows, but for the week. Hopefully you wouldn't quit school, but you would certainly be willing to burn the midnight oil or burn the candle, that's for sure, at a higher rate. So let's move on here with supply. What is supply? Supply is the business owner. You have to be willing and able to provide that good or service at each particular price. So willing and able, just like with demand, willing and able to provide the service. All right, the law of supply states that as a goods price increases, the quantity suppliers are willing and able to supply also increases. So it's a direct relationship. They both go up. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. Whereas with demand, we had an inverse relationship. Well, if the price is low, you're not going to work very hard at it. So we also have a very low quantity supplied. All right, it should make sense to you, hopefully. All right, this is a supply schedule, and I didn't explain it to you this way in demand, but just to kind of clarify and help you out, this is what you would do is you would add these two together to get the market supply. So here's an individual firm's supply of what do we have here? A bottle of whatever shampoo. So at 74 cents, your company, Firm A, is going to supply 200. My company is Firm B, and the market supply then would be 300. And that's usually what we draw. That's usually what we plot on a supply curve is the market supply, and that's what we are talking about here. And you can see as the price gets lower and lower, the quantity supplied also gets lower and lower, all the way down to here at 36 cents. 75 and 50. So we have that direct relationship, higher price, higher quantity, lower price, lower quantity. They both go in the same direction. All right, a supply curve goes the opposite direction of a demand curve. The supply curve, it goes from the bottom left to the top right, and as the price gets higher, the quantity gets higher. All right, so that's the supply curve, and it represents the same information as what is on a supply schedule. All right, just like with demand, we have a change in supply versus a change in quantity supplied. So anytime we're moving along that supply curve, we call that a change in quantity supplied or just a change in price for supply. For a change in supply, we have the supply curve shifting. All of a sudden, business owners are willing to supply more of a good or service, even though the price that they can sell it at hasn't changed. So and we talk about the reasons for that here in the next couple of slides. But change in a good's own price causes a change in quantity supplied, movement along the supply curve, just like I said. And then down here, change in supply is because of a determinant of supply, shifts the supply curve. And just like with demand, supply shifts to the right for an increase and left for a decrease. All right, and sometimes students get confused because, let me go back a slide here. Because as you look at the supply curve, if there's an increase, the supply curve is going to shift to the right. Well, sometimes students will say, oh, the supply goes up, and you want to draw the supply curve up here. Well, that would be incorrect. That's drawing it to the left. You want to make sure if you have an increase, you draw it to the right. All right, a decrease is to the left. So try to stay away from those words up and down. Try and use the words increase and decrease when talking about supply. All right, some determinants of supply. One, if there's a change in technology, it makes it easier to produce something. That would certainly increase supply. Maybe it's all of a sudden easier to screen print shirts. Maybe it's easier to produce microchips or iPads, whatever. That would increase the amount of goods or services that people or businesses are willing to supply. And then this next one here is the one that we tend to see the most often, a change in the price of a factor of production. Remember, the factors of production are land, labor, and capital. And then sometimes we throw entrepreneurship in there. So it's all about profit. If the business owner can make more money, they are going to be more willing to provide that good or service. So if the land gets cheaper, if the labor gets cheaper, or if the capital gets cheaper, you're going to see more of that good or service produced. Whereas, on the other hand, if any of those get more expensive, you're going to see less of it being produced. So you think about gas prices. If gas prices have gone up here recently. Here it is on in February of 2013, and gas prices are about $3.75 a gallon today as I drove to work. If you're a semi truck driver, you're not as excited to go to work today if somebody calls you if they're paying the same amount today as they did say a year ago when gas prices were cheaper. So. The price of producing something is one that we see very, very often that affects the supply curve. So if we're going to make more, remember, we're going to shift that curve to the right. If we're going to make less, we're going to shift that curve to the left. Now, some more reasons for a change in demand. Expectations. This is the one that overlaps from demand. If I am a supplier of Indy 500 t-shirts, and here it is in February, and I've got a garage filled with Indy 500 t-shirts, well, I can't sell those for very much right now. I can only sell those for maybe $3 or $4 because nobody wants to buy them. So as a result, I leave them in my garage because I think in May, when the Indy 500 fans come to town, I'll be able to sell those for $20. So as a result, right now there are no Indy 500 t-shirts out there. Why? Because the suppliers expect to be able to sell those for a higher price come May. All right, number of producers. This one's pretty simple here. If a new fast food restaurant goes up on State Road 135 or on a highway near you or whatever, that increases the supply of cheeseburgers. Here in Greenwood, we recently had Firestone Tires open up. So that's an increase in supply of tires here in the area. So, if another business closes down, then that would decrease the supply of that good or service. And then the last one is the one that is one where you can really find newspaper headlines about it. It's kind of interesting. Is sometimes the government gets involved, and we see down here that we have taxes, quotas, licenses, and subsidies. And you definitely will need to know what all four of those are, how those four work, and how they impact the supply curve. And a tax or a tariff is probably a good example. From a federal level, we usually call it a tariff. At the state level, we call it a tax. So I've got a few examples for you here on the next page. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. All right. At the federal level, the classic case study is a number of years ago. Happened a couple times. Most recently under George Bush II, George W. He increased the price, approved increasing steel tariffs. So when steel was brought in from a country outside of the United States, it got taxed at the borders. So if it was sent on a ship or wouldn't be sent on a plane usually, but sent on a ship, when it came across, our customs and duties officials would go on the board and say, oh, you're bringing steel, and it would be taxed, and that company would have to pay taxes. Well, as a result, that helped out the steel industry here in the United States, which was kind of his main purpose, but it also made the price of steel go up. And the people in Europe who we buy a lot of steel from didn't like that. So the people in Europe, the European Union, approved an increase in taxes on apples, tractors, and believe it or not, toilet paper, because those are products that we here in the United States are actually pretty good at producing and make quite a bit of it and ship it to Europe. So in retaliation, they turned around and put a tariff on our products that are commonly shipped to them. Now here you see these Indiana subsidies, all right? And a subsidy is when the government actually pays us to, let me see if I can get to this website here. We copy and paste it, and I couldn't get it to hyperlink for some reason, so we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to copy and paste it here. Paste it there. This a little bigger. See if this website will go. All right, so here is, whoa, that's not good. Let's try it again. And a little, there we go. Now, these are examples of subsidies throughout the United States, right? And different states and how much they get as far as subsidies from the federal government goes. And here is what the state of Indiana has gotten in subsidies in 2012, I believe, is for this year, you can see that the state of Indiana, what a subsidy does is the government says, if you do blank, we will give you money. All right. If you start up a new technology firm, we will give you money. If you grow soybeans, we will guarantee you a certain amount of money. A lot of times, specific companies will get these grants. Sometimes individual levels of government or the state of Indiana will get these subsidies to create or behave in a certain way. And you can kind of see here. Top incentives by type, corporate income tax credit, rebate or reduction. So we're helping out corporate America there to grow and expand and create jobs probably. Personal income tax credit, technology. This is where a lot of jobs are going to be created for the individual business. So you can see Metal Technologies Incorporated. I have no idea. Never heard of them. They're in Auburn, Indiana. Got $35.2 million. One down here is a really big and growing Indianapolis company, Exact Target, really, really big in the United States and really at the forefront of technology and email marketing is what they do. And they're an Indianapolis company, and maybe some of your parents or family members work for them because they are really, really growing. You can see Angie's List. You may have heard of them. Here's another one for Exact Target. No idea what that would be for. Lightbox, I've heard of them, but I'm not sure what they do. But you can see there's an RV company, and the list goes on and on. So a subsidy will cause the increase in the supply of that good or service because the government is helping pay some of the cost for it. So, all right, let's go back to our slideshow. I think I have just one more slide. Yeah. All right, so let me go back and make sure I have talked about everything that I need to talk about here. All right, so we talked about tariffs, all right? We talked about subsidy. A quota is a limit. We only allow so much wool to be brought into the United States. There's a limit on it. So that's what a quota is. It's a maximum that can be brought in to the United States, and lots of countries have those. And it's not the same for every country. We allow Mexico to bring in a certain amount. We allow Argentina to bring in a certain amount. We would allow Brazil to bring in a certain amount. So it's a quota per country. It's not an overall quota. All right, elasticity of supply. Just like with demand, we have elasticity of supply. But supply is a little bit easier to understand because it's all about how long it takes to produce the product. So if I asked you about the elasticity of, say, haircuts. Well, that'd be pretty elastic because all of a sudden you could get more people to start cutting hair. That would be elastic. Something that would be very inelastic would be Christmas trees because it takes 14 years or whatever to grow those. So if the price of Christmas trees goes through the roof, you're not all of a sudden going to see a lot more Christmas trees because it takes years and years and years to grow those. So the longer it takes to supply something, the more inelastic it's going to be. The quicker you can produce something, it's going to be very elastic. So number of seats at a Pacer game, that's very inelastic. There are only 19,000 seats, whatever, in that stadium. It's not like they can all of a sudden say, oh, we're going to add 5,000 seats. That would take a year or two to add. So seats at a concert, seats at a sporting event are very, very inelastic. And I believe that concludes the presentation.